People don't care about their jobs. They're actively disengaged. They couldn't care less. It's worse right now than it was during COVID, if you can imagine. We're living in a world where there is a connectivity between the energy that people are bringing into the workplace and the results that we're getting out of workplace. I'm going to show you the research. Little known fact, I learned this back when I did graduate work in organizational development, the number one motivator of employees, you want to guess? What do you think motivates employees? The number one motivator is
Roxanne Emmerich.
Okay, who here wants to have a lot more fun? Raise your hand. Yeah. I'm not hearing the fun there. More fun? Yes? Make more money. Hand up. Eat chocolate every single day and never gain a pound. Hands up. I can't help you with that last one. Allow me an experiment. In just a second, when I have you stand up, and I want you to introduce yourself to 3 people who you don't know, as if you could not care less about them. All right? Stand up. Go ahead and introduce yourself to 3 people. Go. And freeze wherever you are. Now I want you to introduce yourself to 3 entirely different people, this time in typical business mode. Go. And freeze. And now I'd like you to introduce yourself to 3 entirely different people, this time as if you have just spotted your best friend you have not seen since high school. Go! All right, give yourselves a round of applause and take a chair. What you have just witnessed is the difference between what's going on in America in most workplaces and how it could be. In most organizations, when you walk in, all you see is parts disease. Just parts. No one looks up, no one makes eye contact, no one shows they care, yes? And we're living in a world where there is a connectivity between the energy that people are bringing into the workplace and the results that we're getting out of workplace. I'm going to show you the research that proves this to be true. Now, before we do this, I just want to share with you that I have over the last, I've given 3,000, almost 4,000 speeches now over the years, but I've specialized recently in the banking industry for the last 20 years. And there's a triple storm going on in this industry. We have now gone from 20,000 banks down to 4,000. My friend Dan Burris, who is the leading technology futurist, says that's called a hard trend line, which means we're going down to 2,000. And the same thing is happening in other industries as well. And as I'm watching this happen, it's like, okay, why is this happening? Well, we've got culture at an all-time low, including it's worse right now than it was during COVID, if you can imagine. People don't care about their jobs. They're actively disengaged. They couldn't care less. And here's the thing. When was the last time someone called home and said, honey, today I performed average? It doesn't happen, right? We call home, we kick some back in and made something happen, and we were up to something big in the world. And as workplaces, we don't know how to make what big looks like obvious to people so they can get in the game. They're up in the field, up in the stands, they're not down on the field playing the game. So I want to show you transformational work in the banking industry, but this can apply to your family office, to your organizations that you're managing. Many of you are on many boards. This is the kind of information that when you understand what gets people who are disengaged engaged and in the game and knowing how they tie to profit on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, suddenly everything begins to change. So in this particular industry, we happen to have three problems. You have the culture problem. According to ABA Research, American Bankers Association, the two biggest problems that we have right now is, number one, not enough deposits. We've lost $1 trillion in the deposit market, and every bank is competing out of their mind for the same dollars. And we have a net interest margin compression, the difference between what they pay for the deposits and what they're receiving on the loans is being compressed with a huge part of the industry down in the 2 area of net interest margin. They will not make it. There's probably 1,000 banks at this point that have no chance of making it. But there is the great divide, and those who are getting it big time. And I want to show you what they do, because all of these principles can be used in any organization that you're on the board for or run. So the key here is to understand that people need to get in the game, but how do we make that happen? I want to talk first about the profitability transformation, getting people tied to profit. The key here is, how do we get them in top 5% of performance? I don't know about you, but I don't want to play a game unless I'm playing the top 5%. It's no fun to do anything other than win. Little known fact, learned this back when I did graduate work in organizational development, the number one motivator of employees, anybody want to guess? Shout it out. Go ahead. What do you think motivates employees? Recognition. Give them a round of applause for trying, but wrong, okay? Give them a round of applause. We gotta support each other here, okay? How about you? What do you think's the number one? What's get them excited? Compensation. Give them a round of applause. Wrong, okay? Well done. The number one motivator is the feeling of progress every single day. But now we gotta talk about progress on what? Because when I show you the research in a bit, you're gonna realize they don't know how they tie to profit. And this is a bit of a problem. All right, I want to tell you a story, a couple case studies here. You might recognize this CEO. I've been working with them. When they first came to me, this was a bank that I turned down 3 times before I took them on. They wouldn't take no for an answer. They're located in Kansas, in a city that the New York Times referred to as the most remote location in the country. As I like to joke, you have to take a float plane and a mule just to go see my buddy Chris. I go to, at the time that he called me, they were at $143 million in asset size, and I said, I don't think that I can help you. And I pride myself in we're always the best return on investment people invest in. I don't want to take your money unless I know we can get this done. And he was like, come on, I know we can do this. So I went in to do their kickoff, and as I showed up there, their downtown happens to be, well, let's just say that the only restaurant in town is located in the gas station. This gives you the clear view, yes? This young man wouldn't take no for an answer. I called my team on the night of the kickoff and I said, we gotta send the check back. There's no way they can make a go of this thing. This is just ever going to work. Well, fast forward, this is now a bank that 3 years later was ranked number 2 highest performing bank in the country for banks under $1 billion. And they had started with having lost money 2 years in a row. This is also the bank, you read about this in the Wall Street Journal. Remember the bank where the CEO got the sticky fingers and had the Bitcoin going out into his own account? We acquired that bank, okay? That was one of the banks, and so I'll tell you a little bit about how do you take on a complete and total train wreck of a culture to get something like this turned around. So right now, that $140 million bank is now just shy of $1 billion in the middle of nowhere. Don't tell me it can't be done. There are people doing it. When Chris basically did the numbers, he said they did the math in terms of how much additional growth we had and what the additional premium pricing we had in the growth. And Roxanne and her team made me an extra $47 million. Okay, so which is not bad considering they were only $143 million in asset size when we started, yes? Okay, now the reason I share this with you is all of us need to think bigger. This everything's fine culture is not working, yes? You'll notice that when you come up to me and you ask me how I'm doing, I'm always going to say, fantastic. When somebody say fine, I'm thinking, oh, you poor thing. What is it like to be in that body, to be fine? Fine is not okay. Most organizations run around, they have fine people. They're not up to a game. We got to get up to the game. Here's another bank. They are from New Mexico. This is a bank that absolutely transformed. They came to me with some cultural issues. They were already a high-performing bank with a 2 ROA. That's a high-performing bank. But they said, we can do better. And so they were already in the nosebleed section, and we took them to a much higher level of nosebleed very quickly, because Cody, when we got started, was during COVID. He used to call me. I have a home here in Naples, and he would call me because he was in New Mexico time every Friday night about 4 or 5 o'clock, and we were about to have our little neighborhood party for COVID, where we'd all pull out our lawn chairs and sit 4 feet from each other, and because we were all terrified that we'd kill each other. But Cody would always call me every week, and he'd say, Roxanne, is it me? Why can't I get this culture fixed? Is it me? Should I just quit and get somebody else in this position? I said, no, Cody, you're fine. You got some jerks. Anybody have some jerks that work in your team? Yes? Okay. Some of you are lying. Okay, all right. But look at the transformation that happened just by him getting into that game. Here's Patty Steele. Patty Steele was the assistant to the CEO at the time we started working with them. They didn't tell me, and they told me when I went back down to see them 30 days later, they said, well, we weren't going to tell you this when we first got started because we thought you wouldn't take us on, but we basically had determined if this wasn't going to work, we were going to sell the bank. Well, 30 days later, they said they grew more than they had in the previous 10 years combined. They're now one of the revered banks in this country. And as you can see, they're ranked 94th nationwide, and that's after doing an acquisition every single year, which basically takes banks and puts them on their ear for a couple of years. They just did an acquisition, and they're still over 2.2 ROA. Don't say that it can't be done when people are doing this. Now, all of this is happening in a world where most banks are looking at like a 2 net interest margin, and many of the banks are well under a 4 in return on assets. In other words, they're not going to make it unless something happens fast. All right, so I'm going to introduce you to the predictable profit playbook. Can be used in your family office, in your investment, in the organizations that you're using, to understand the basics of how do you tie people to profit and get them winning and getting them engaged to make that happen. So anybody excited to see this? I'm not hearing it. You're nodding your head, but I want some excitement for this. Yes? Okay, let's do this. Okay, so there we go. We're going to start off with deposit quality. So what I always do is I say, where is the biggest hole in the bucket? There's all these resources going into the top of every bucket in the business, yes? So you got marketing, and you got payroll expenses, and you've got new acquisition costs and new customers. And so you have all of these resources going into the top. But in the bottom of the bucket, you've got to look to see what is the biggest hole. For most banks, right now, it's deposits. They can't grow if they don't have deposits. They can't prosper if they have to pay up for deposits. If you see a bank that's advertising a CD up on a billboard short their stock, they're in trouble, okay? Because they haven't figured out you can't make money when you're paying a lot for CDs. It means that they haven't developed the skill set to go do something differently. So it's all about getting it done, not in years, but in months. Let me introduce you to this young lady, Christine Hankins. When I did a kickoff at this bank, this also was a bank that was on the verge of having to sell. They went from 300 million in assets to 200 million in assets in 2 years. They were shrinking, they were unprofitable, and they said they need to do something different or this isn't going to work. We started working, and on the day that her very first day starting in the bank, she started as a teller, a drive-through teller, and on that day, she got very turned on about the things I'm going to show you and the excitement. And so she actually went into this thing that we created called the Accredited Banking Professional Program, which is basically designed like, how do you work with the affluent and add value? Most bankers, all they can do is quote you the rate sheet and give you the terms on something. They don't know how to transform your business, transform your finances. They're not bringing skill to the game. We're living in a world where skill is what you get paid for. So this young lady in a $200 million bank, mind you, while she was doing her practice calls that we have them do while they're going through the certification, she brought in $14 million in non-interest-bearing deposits, in other words, free money, and another $6 million in deposits in 4 months. From being a teller to bringing in 10% of the assets of the bank in 4 months. Yes, she was promoted. Yes, she became the president. Yes, they recently put her onto the board. And yes, this took even to the board in less than 5 years. See, everybody's worried about our young people. I love our young people. You give them a game plan. Everybody's complaining. They all want to rise to the top so quickly. Well, guess what? Let them rise to the top quickly. I have so many 20-somethings right now as executives of banks, and they are far outperforming the other executives who have these old crusty ideas, and they haven't tried anything new, and they have not been developing their skill sets to make things happen. So Patty, when I started working with their bank, they were having a huge deposit problem, and then they completely transformed their deposits. But here's the interesting story. She was sitting in a seminar. I do this thing called a Breakthrough Banking Boot Camp. And as we're sitting in that boot camp, I'm doing a presentation, and she comes up during the break, and she says, "You just got done telling them that deposits are easy." And I looked around the room, and they don't believe you. But I've been doing what you've been telling me, and deposits are easy. And right now, this bank is swimming in deposits, because they figured out the game of how to make that happen. So I want all of you to think about the biggest hole in your bucket. If you're not running a bank, it's not deposits, but you've got a big hole in a bucket in whatever business you're on the board on. What is the biggest hole in the bucket? And then what do you need to do? And it's usually through extreme mastery and skill set that you can move through to create that kind of result. But I want to get into what is the real transformation, and to understand that we need to talk about that culture is about what drives performance. There are hundreds of studies that have proven the same thing. Culture is the leading predictor of future growth and profitability. But most people understand culture all wrong. They just think it's a happy bus, but it's not. It's a happy bus called going someplace called profitability. Let's figure out and see what that looks like. So it's all about the hard numbers. So we did a nationwide study. And in that study, we looked at 1,000 participants all across the United States, equally distributed amongst different age groups, evenly distributed amongst different kinds of responsibilities. And so all the PhDs got together, put this thing together. And here's what we found. We asked people, do you perform in the top 10%? Anybody else besides me alarmed? 75% believe they perform in the top 10%. Turn to the person next to you and say, "That dog don't hunt." I'm not hearing it. That dog don't hunt. We got people getting paid, going home to their spouses and saying, "I'm rocking this job." And they think they're a top 10% performer, and yet most of them are not. Well, whose fault is that? Well, I have a belief system. It is the fault of the managers and the leaders who don't understand how to tie people to profit to make that happen. Does your company culture motivate job performance? 80% said yes, it does. Okay, so they all know that culture is important. Do you believe accountability creates a positive work culture? 84% believe accountability is important. In fact, wait till I show you the Gen Z statistics. Do you have clear performance metrics for all positions? Or do you wish that we would have clear performance metrics, I should say? 79% want to be measured on performance metrics. I found that shocking. And but here's the real finding here. Gen Z, we asked them, would you quit if you were told you would be fired for coming 5 minutes late to work? 63% said they would quit because they have to come to work on time. Anybody else want to go like, woo, how are we managing this workplace? Yes? All right, so what is the answer to this problem? Because it's not okay to have this problem. So I'll give you all this research and I'll give you these slides. So you'll have this information, because what you're going to find out is there are different, you're not managing one culture. You are managing many different cultures. People want different things. Like, we figured out that the young people, Gen Zs, want a fun culture. They want a company that's up to something good. That's what motivates them. We found executives, their number one reason why they stay in an organization is that they're being developed, and we're investing in their development. You need to know not only what is in getting them excited, but also what is their quit trigger. And again, all this, I have a white paper with all this research that I would recommend you take back to your boards, to your groups, to understand what is it within your culture that you want to have happen. Now, I grew up on a farm. Anybody else grow up on a farm besides me? A few of us here, okay. So my dad had these 3 words he would say over and over again. You might know what those would be? No, not I love you.
Go to work.
Figure it out. Okay. So I was 7 years old. It was the last day of 2nd grade. I got off the bus. My dad met me by the bus and said, "Get changed. I need some help right away." And I said, "Okay." So I went and I put on my clothes and got over to the tractor, and he said, "Okay, you're going to drive the tractor with the corn planter up the valley." And I'm thinking, okay, all right. So I got in this Alice D17 tractor. And as I'm sitting up there, I'm realizing with my legs that were about the size of a celery stalk, that pushing in a clutch required 2 legs. And so I would take both legs, then bring them over to the one side to push in the clutch. And of course, I couldn't touch the clutch and the brake at the same time. So I dragged my foot all the way over to hit the brake. How many of you realize this is really dangerous for me to be driving a tractor up the valley with their cars when I'm 7 years old? And yet my father always had the motto of figure it out. When I was 12 years old, I was sitting in the breezeway between the milk house and the barn, and we were looking at the catalog for the county fair, and he said, "You know, you need to take your 4-H cap to the fair. I think you could win grand champion." And I said, "Dad, look right here. There's a rule book. It says you need to be 13 years old and a boy." And my dad said, "Some rules are stupid. You're taking that bull to the fair." Well, if you've ever been to a county fair, what you do is you walk backwards with your animal, and the judge is picking out all the animals, and so whoever gets left in the circle last wins the grand champion prize. I'm down to the second, there are only 2 of us left, and we're going around this circle, the judges are looking at things, and the mother of the young man showing the other animal runs up to the judge with the rule book, and I got the reserve grand champion. But I knew in my heart I won the grand champion. But I also learned from my dad, some rules are stupid. And my motto is always, who made up that stupid rule? My very first job out of college, I was the very first agricultural lender. I worked with 423 different men. First convention was at the Lake Geneva Playboy Club. I'm the only woman there without a push-up bra on. How many of you think that would be kind of strange? And in every job I ever had, I was always the only woman. Why? Because I had a belief system given to me by my father that you can do whatever a man can do. We have belief systems going on in these organizations, holding people back from performing, and it's just not working in our organizations, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So let's talk a little bit about, so 63% basically blame not having enough resources for why they're not getting their job done. I have a buddy named Dr. Dan Diamond. He is the guy that he's probably in Jamaica right now. He's the guy that whenever there's a crisis, he volunteers his time and he takes a medical crew in to go save them. And so he says when he lands on the ground, there's usually no electricity, there's no running water, and people are bleeding and dying, and he says he's working with teams that they're meeting for the first time today. They haven't had any relationships whatsoever, and they come together as a team. And he said to me one time, he says, I believe that the Gallup Culture Survey is the most evil thing that has ever happened in corporate America. I said, well, why is that? He says, because one of the questions in that culture survey is, do you have the resources you need to do your job? And he said, that's ridiculous. You're teaching them that they don't have to figure it out to make things happen when everybody else needs to just go make that happen. And I couldn't agree more. We have a enabled workforce who believes that as long as they don't have everything they need, which they will never have, that they're not held accountable to results. So we have a mindset issue, yes? And it's a crisis. And it can be, and people can be saved when you get at them early enough. I was teaching a breakthrough banking boot camp recently, and a young man walks up to me during the break and he says, Roxanne, can I talk to you? I said, sure. He said, I just want you to know I'm an Emmerich group baby. I said, ooh, I don't know what happens in these hotel rooms at night when I'm not paying attention. And I was just joking with him, and he goes, no. He says, my mother was working at the bank when you first came in, and she loves the principles that you teach. Because we teach things like there is no whining. If you have a complaint, bring it to someone who can do something about it. There is no gossip. If you have a complaint about somebody, the only person you can talk to about it is someone who can do something about it, and anything other than that is gossip, and we're going to miss you. We have a zero tolerance for gossip. We have if you blow it, you don't get to have an excuse in the story. You just get to say, I blew it, here's my massive corrective action plan. These are just some of the many principles that we ask people to live by in our learning platform. We call it sandbox etiquette. How to play in the sandbox nice with the other kids. I have CEOs all the time that always say, hey, can I give this to my kids? Because I want my kids to learn this stuff so that they can be successful when they get into the workplace. Absolutely. So anyway, so this young man comes up and he said, I'm an Emmerich group baby. And he says, all I've ever wanted to do all my life growing up under my mother's teaching me these principles was I wanted to work as a branch manager at the bank and be a pastor on the weekend. I said, what do you do? He said, I'm a branch manager at the bank and I'm a pastor on the weekend. I said, wow, I just got goosebumps. Another young man walks up behind him. He had heard the conversation and he said, I'm an Emmerich group baby too. And the reason I share this with you is I'm telling you that our youth is starved for direction. They want to know how to be great human beings. We're not teaching them that in the workplace. The workplace is the new family. This is where we teach them how to be good humans. We teach them possibilities. We teach them ethics. We teach them to live their life fully and to not be self-consumed, but to go out there and make a difference in the world. And when they start catching on to this, they're loving it, and the businesses prosper because of it. We teach our banks the number one value that they should hold is client success. If you think that having a satisfied customer is the answer, let me assure you, a satisfied customer will leave you every day for a better rate. But if you make them profoundly successful, they will never, ever leave you. I gotta believe that applies to every business in this room. All right, so let's talk about this individual and team transformation and the untapped potential. Let's watch this.
Do you feel alive?
I feel happy with myself.
I feel happy with myself too. What do you got, any words of wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them?
Everybody, I know you can believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, you will know how to ride a bike. If you don't, you just keep practicing. You will get the hang of it, I know it. If you keep practicing, you will get the hang of it. And then you can get better and better. And you can do it.
Give me some thumbs up. All right.
All right. It feels good.
All right.
He won't go away. I love the resilience of this kid, yes? There is a need in all of us to conquer something nearly impossible, yes? It is what drives the human human spirit to do something great. When we give our team members a game worth playing, they can rise to the occasion, provided we take them through stage-appropriate accountability. So many of you have read John Wooden's books, and John Wooden talked about how when he would bring a new basketball star into his college team, how he'd say, "Sit down, big boy. We're going to learn how to tie our shoes, and we're going to get this right." Just like riding a bike is one little thing, one step. It's the incremental steps that you take along the way to get people good at the things that they do. One of the first things we do when we start coming into a bank is we say, okay, we're going to all learn how to answer the phones. Phones are handled in hideous ways in banks. Oh my gosh, they have sales prevention departments, yes? I swear to God, I'm going to buy a bank in Naples. I will. I swear to God I will, because I'm still looking for a bank. I've lived here for 7 years. I'm still looking for a bank in Naples. I keep opening accounts here. I put some money in and I go, not for me, not for me, not for me. Nobody understands how to take care of customers here and to make a difference in their lives. It's absolutely crazy that we don't have that in Naples, and it's a crime. So here's a young woman who came into the accredited banking professional program. She was in charge of electronic banking. So basically, she was an operations person. She had the right emotional intelligence profile to be an accredited banking professional. So we put her into the program. This young woman did 43 million of new business in her very first year with no portfolio whatsoever. Why? Because she just stepped into the game and learned the basics. But every time I taught that class, she was in there and she was always the highest on the gamification points for having done the most work. So having their ability to see that they can win by doing the work gets them proficient at doing something that matters. It's part of the game to make things happen. Whoa, he keeps coming up again. All right, so I want to talk about unlocking the potential of your team. And we are going backwards here. Maybe I'm doing something wrong here. I'm sure I am. Here we go. All right. So the key here is Leslie isn't the only one. So I want to close off our ideas today by talking about when I started something called the Institute for Extraordinary Banking, and every year we throw an awards banquet and we celebrate the best banks in America, and we have independent judges who know the industry well. They look at these different banks and they measure them in 5 different categories: their measurable customer success, their impact on the community, their profitability and effectiveness at basically running the bank, and philanthropy projects. Basically, like, are they showing up and really doing what a community bank can do? And many of these banks tell this kind of story, how they double in size with 1/3 fewer employees. And so this bank is now voted best place to work in Illinois, the #1 place in Illinois for young people to work. But the real story here is they doubled in size and they have 1/3 less people. I'm going to suggest that you got too many people in your organization. And some of them are actually making more work for the others. And you kind of sort of know who they are, yes? That exists all over. So the game we need to get into. So when I just started this performance advantage funds, when we're investing in different banks, one of the things that we look for is banks that need to figure out how to get their team proficient at what they're doing to make things happen. And this would be a perfect example. Our largest investor right now actually is the family office that invest in the bank, and he said we're the best return investment of all of their investments that they invested in. And so when I told him I was starting the Performance Advantage Fund to invest in banks and go in and do this as an investor, he was like, I'm so in. And so they became our largest investor coming in. Because the key here is most banks are being run with great inefficiencies because their people believe they're working hard, but busy is a 4-letter word. Being good and proficient is the game that we're up to. All right, so it's all about consistent, repeatable results and making that happen. Here's some pictures of the awards program just to get a sense. We give away a car. We've been giving away a school in Africa every year in the name of the bank. And so that's part of the game that we've been playing just to kind of give you an idea. So it's not luck, it's a proven system. I had the great opportunity when I first started in this business. I had been running a bank that we set some national records in terms of growth and profitability, and I was having a blast. And then I was like, I read this book called Power Purpose, and I knew that for the rest of my life, I wanted to be going into businesses and transforming them to being the highest performers. So one of my very first clients was called Great Clips. They cut hair. And so they asked me to speak, and I went back for many years. Every year I worked with them. They were the #1 performing franchise in the country. And I remember going to this banquet. At the end of my speech, the CEO said, "Would you like to come to the banquet tonight?" And I said, "Well, gosh, all the women have updos and they got gowns on. I got my business jacket on." She goes, "Oh, you're fine. Come on." So I'm sitting right about there in the room, and they've got fancy lights and fancy tables, and everybody's got sparkles on. And somebody comes up to the stage and they said, "And for the region that had the most increase of hairspray sales, and the winner is," and they shouted out her name, and this woman comes running down the aisle. She's got tears coming down. People are standing up, and I'm thinking, it's hairspray. It's hairspray. But I got a lesson. It's not about hairspray. People want to be recognized for doing the right things, and we do a terrible job of that in organizations. We don't know what the right things are, number one, and as we're recognizing them, we don't know how to recognize them. So we have a hideous problem called, let's create another budget and see if that transforms the results. So it's all about creating a playbook that integrates all the marketing processes, the sales process, the cultural process, getting everybody highly proficient at their jobs, getting managers knowing how to manage, making the magic happen. It's no accident that the head of the largest analytics company for banks just recently said that every one of the highest performing banks all works with the Emmerich Group. So I want to close by telling you about my son. Called me one time when he was on spring break. And he had said, "Mom, I'm on spring break." And I went, "Oh, I didn't even know you were going on spring break. Where'd you go?" He goes, "Oh, I'll tell you when I get home." And I'm thinking, all right, okay, that's strange. Why isn't he going to tell me where he is? So it was the next night, my son calls again. It's 9:00 Central, where we live in Minneapolis, and it's clearly wherever he is, it's at 10:00 at night. And he calls, and at this time I say to my husband, "Something's going on here. Why does a 21-year-old boy call his mama when he is on spring break? He should be pounding back the beer and having a good time, and none of this makes any sense. So he's messing with us, like, what is going on?" Another night goes by, he calls in again. And at this point I said to my husband, "Okay, this is killing me. I have no idea what's going on. Why is our son calling us every night? He doesn't normally call us every night. Why is he calling us every night?" Well, then come Saturday, he calls me and he says, "Mom, I got a bunch of guys in the car and we're on the way to Minneapolis, and could we all stop? Could they stay at the house tonight, and could we all go out for Sunday brunch tomorrow?" I said, "That'd be awesome." He says, "And Mom, we're all kind of stinky. Is it okay if we have showers right away?" And I'm thinking, okay, he's bringing home stinky boys. I got it. Okay, I have no idea what's going on here. And of course, all that night after they took their showers, they didn't tell us what they've been doing. We go out for Eastern brunch, and you have to know my husband to appreciate this. My husband is one, he ran the largest data analytics firm for the retail industry in the country, and owned it. And so when he asks a question, he goes deep. So we're sitting around brunch. The young man looks in the eyes, my husband looks in the eyes of the boys and says, "What you guys been doing on spring break?" And they said, "Well, we were in these little islands off of North Carolina, where there's some poor people who live there, and their houses need to be fixed. And so we were fixing roofs and screen doors and toilets, and we're like, oh, well, how'd you come to do that?" And this kid says, "Well, my grandfather started this foundation to help these people." "Well, that's fantastic. It sounds like you're really close with your grandfather." Carl said, well, yes, I am. He says, I lived with them all through high school. My husband, leaving no stone unturned, said, well, Carl, why'd you live with your grandfather through that period through high school? And Carl says, well, my mother was a prostitute. Now, in polite conversation, most people would just stop asking questions. Yes? Not my husband. He said, well, so your mother was a prostitute? And he goes, yeah, well, then they moved me out of her house because social services found out about it. So they moved me in with my uncle. But that didn't go any better because he kept me in a cage. And he would feed me food underneath the cage until social services found out about it. And my husband says, oh my gosh, that's awful. He goes, oh, it wasn't so bad. I could get out from underneath the cage when he wasn't looking. And so my husband said, well, how did you get away from your uncle? He said, well, social services found out that I wasn't going to school and I was being kept in a cage. And so they put me back in with my mother, the prostitute, and things weren't going much better. And so I kind of got in some trouble. I drove a car through a jewelry store window to steal some money for drugs. And so I got in trouble and I was being sent to jail. And then I found out that I have a father. And all I could think about was how excited I was that I have a father. And I couldn't wait to meet him. And then when I met him, I realized he was as despicable as my mother, and I saw no hope in my life. And then one day, I get a call from my grandfather. And my grandfather said, I found out today that I have a grandson. And I'm so sorry I didn't know you existed. And I just want you to know I love you unconditionally. And I want you to come live with us in Chicago. And so I came to live with his grandfather in Chicago, became a football star. Carl is now a medical doctor. Carl is now someone who has lived a whole different possibility. Why? Because someone said he loved him. In our workplaces, we need to create cultures where people feel loved, where they feel guided, where they feel directed into a possibility they didn't even know was possible. We have a generation right now that everybody is down on, and I am so up on Gen Z and their possibility, because when you give them the right track, the right mindset, the right possibilities, and you track them, they take on to that like you can't even imagine. So I challenge you all to go back out into your workplaces and not your board responsibilities, whatever, to be looking for how you have a role in shaping the culture of your organization, where people can love their jobs, where customers can walk in and feel that everybody loves their jobs, and as a result of it, my goodness, profit happens too. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful to be with you this morning. Have a fantastic rest of your day.